important topic, both for the region but also for the UK. I mean, I've been working on this sector in and around this sector for 15 years or more, and it's great to see sort of growing recognition of the importance of the sector to economic growth strategy, both here in the UK and also internationally. And I call that out because it's not always been the case, and indeed it's sometimes easy to dismiss this sector as not a priority, a kind of nice to have, or indeed I think the worst of all of them, low productivity. So I'd like to use the 10 minutes I've got to just cover off why I think this sector is already a key strategic sector for the UK, what the growth opportunity is from supporting it further, and maybe some suggestions on areas that might be achieved. So first, effectively do that with three hypotheses. So why is it a strategic sector today? And we'll cover off what it actually is in that moment. What are the characteristics about the sector that make it particularly attractive, I think, as an investment prospect, and the role for government? So in terms of what the visitor economy is, if we just, there we go. I've got slides, sorry, I'm a consultant, I can't help myself with slides, forgive me. You don't have to read them, there's not a lot of detail on them, but if you want to read them, they're there. So first of all, the visitor economy actually means different things to different countries, but generally is a mixture of business and leisure tourism, international and domestic visitors. And it really, certainly for the UK, it is very geographically spread, so everywhere from sort of Carlisle to Cornwall, or indeed Paddington to Pembrokeshire. There are really important parts of the visitor economy, and that's without thinking about all of the things that go around that economy, like fantastic stories that we're in today. But we heard some of the numbers earlier in terms of the economic contribution of the sector and the 500 or so thousand visitors that come here every year. So why do I emphasise that diversity? Well, partly because I think it's not always understood. I think typically when we think about the visitor economy, some of us, probably me included, tend to default to thinking about inbounds, visitors from abroad. But 2/3 of the GDP contribution from the sector is actually from domestic visitors. And there are also really important differences in the way that money is spent between domestic and international. So while international visitors typically spend more than domestic visitors, it is typically pretty concentrated in London. 53% comes in London. No bad, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is a feature. Whereas if you look at the domestic visitors, they are almost exclusively outside of London. So about 80% of that is outside of London. And one of the big questions you were posing was, well, what is the total sum of all of this activity when you think about the different things that go into the visitor economy directly and all the things it supports? Now, I can't actually tell you that today. DCMS are putting out some research shortly that will bring it all together. So this is very much a journey, but I think when you see the numbers, they really are substantial, and I think are genuinely exciting. So but it is diverse in nature and material in its contributions. But I think in some ways the most exciting thing I think about it is the social contribution that it makes. So the tourism-related sectors employ around 4 million people in the UK, around 10% of the UK workforce, which again I think is really substantial. This group of people, I'm sure, are aware of these numbers. I don't think they're well understood outside of a group like this. But I think that employment number is actually also the answer to the charge that's sometimes made around this sector, that it is low productivity. Because what low productivity really means is it employs a lot of people. And in the current geopolitical climate, I think there's a lot to be said for a sector that employs an awful lot of people, and people that are, that are living here in the UK. Moreover, the nature of that employment is spread around the UK. Often it's in areas that would otherwise, or indeed are, relatively high in terms of deprivation and economic inactivity, and Chris spoke a little bit about that earlier. But I just wanted to emphasise that point about economic inactivity, because it's a real fundamental challenge, and there is an economic scarring that happens in communities from long-term inactivity, and that scarring affects the individuals, affects the society they're within, but it also crosses generations. So I think there's a really key strategic role for this sector in addressing that level of economic activity. There's also some great work that UK Hospitality have done looking at the transfer of skills from hospitality into other sectors of the economy. When you learn about bookkeeping or accountancy or marketing, help you transfer into a long-term career. And I think that I'm really excited to hear there's a whole work stream going on around that. Now, we shouldn't pretend that flexible employment that is characteristic of the sector is a panacea. There clearly are some downsides, but I think the evidence very clearly shows that this can be a gateway into long-term successful and rewarding careers for a large number of people. I think the other thing I wanted to call out is the visitor economy has a really important role in crowding in investments and helping to regenerate communities. I was very close to this is dated now as an example, but I was very close to the business case work around London's bid for the Olympic Games. And what is really clear is that bid process and the halo that went around it was absolutely critical to catalysing huge amounts of investment that have completely transformed the Stratford area. And I don't think there's any realistic prospect that level of investment would have happened without the Olympic Games. Outside of London, you could think about the Dundee V&A Museum, one of the largest regeneration projects in the UK. It's now generating 2,000 jobs a year within Scotland. Tour de France, very close to my heart, brought in 130 million for the Yorkshire region, as well as being absolutely fantastic in terms of its brand value. And then the Manchester Convention Complex is generating about 150 million a year in terms of value for Manchester and the surrounding areas. Now, we've got lots of numbers, but I think the point is they're all big and they're actually all very meaningful in terms of the economic growth of the regions that these assets exist within. And so that idea of a strategic asset, I think, is really fundamental, and leads me on to the second point, is the role of the sector as a engine of growth. And I think when you start looking at it, it is not just about what goes on within the sector itself. It is all of the other things that are enabled from the sector. So it is agriculture supplying hotels or hospitality. It is the IT services providing booking facilities for venues and many other things. And what I think is really unique about this sector is how much that value stays within the UK. The World Economic Forum have got a lovely paper that estimates that 91% of the value spent in the hospitality sector ultimately stays within the UK's borders, which is a lot higher than many other sectors. And there's nothing wrong with imports, I'm not a Donald Trump, but in terms of actually thinking about how the UK government gets return on its investment, there is a higher concentration in this sector than others, particularly when you think about that transformative effect in young people. And actually, we talked a little bit earlier around the Birmingham investment that NITED's worked on. Again, I've been working on that business case, and it was really compelling the way that the public-private investment and partnership around that investment was working to basically unlock new local supply chains. And we estimated about 8,500 jobs would be created in the region from that investment. And that brings me on to, I think, where where I think we are. One exercise, the role for government. So, Chris talked a little about this earlier. In my head, the government has a critical role to play in acting as helping to contribute to the overarching strategy for the sector, but also setting the right enabling environment. Now, investors clearly see this as an attractive place to invest as private sector entities. Universal being another great example that's clearly very topical. But we shouldn't lose sight of actually the very fierce competition that exists for that capital. And I work a lot with governments across the world on their visitor economy strategy. And I'm often struck by actually quite how closely, and probably more so than in the UK, they tie the visitor economy to their overall economic strategic objectives. Chris picked on a lot of the points I was going to raise around the role in terms of transport infrastructure, the endless debate about whether we have more airport capacity in the UK, trains and indeed not spots. I think they are absolutely important. But there are other things that the government can also do on a smaller scale. Many of my clients call out places like Singapore in terms of its ability to offer a really coordinated approach to incentives for investment that range from fiscal incentives to access to infrastructure and many other things. They go far beyond what you might see here. Singapore is a particular place, clearly, but Frankfurt has established itself as a very successful venue in terms of business tourism, again, by coordinating assets in a very deliberate way. I working currently with another international client who I can't name, but it's a government, they're offering some really targeted incentives actually to reduce the price of inbound visitors, because they want to catalyse their economy and lock in effectively a tourist market that they think will pay off in the long term. Counterpoint to that, and just thinking again about the UK, as I was working with a private sector business recently who, let's say, host a series of very high-profile events across the globe, and we were looking at the kind of strategy of where they host them. And London wasn't actually on the map for them, and we sort of talked a bit about why. And their view was it was too difficult to coordinate between the UK government's Mayor of London and TfL, and it was frankly easier to go to New York or Riyadh, where they could just sit down with one person, do a deal, and they'd be out. And I thought, it's one example, but I thought it really catalysed for me some of the challenges we have in terms of just making investment easier into the UK. So this slide sort of really speaks to the very much work in progress efforts that are going on. This comes out of a sort of 4-week exercise that we've been doing with Paul and colleagues at DCMS. But I thought I'd try and put some numbers around the sort of size of the prize to say, well, what could the payoff from this be? Now, UK visitors spend about 50 billion a year going abroad. If you could just get 1 in 10 of those people to have an extra holiday in the UK, you could potentially unlock about 8 billion in GVA for the UK. That translates to about 70,000 jobs. If Chris's target is met, or ambition is met, depending on which way you think about it, you're talking about creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. So there's huge potential in doing that, particularly when you think about the regions that those jobs will be created in and the levels of inactivity that are currently exist in that region. I should also say that we shouldn't think of outbound tourism as necessarily a bad thing, because people going abroad also spend a lot of money on the way out, staying in a hotel near Heathrow or getting on the trains there. So there is an important economic contribution from outbound tourism as well. It also plays a important, I think, strategic role in helping maintain the UK as a hub destination or an international hub, which we shouldn't lose sight of. Just to conclude, hopefully that is a reasonably compelling view of why I'm so excited about this sector and why I genuinely think it is a strategic sector for the UK, both in the current economic climate and in the longer term. The early stage work, and this is early stage, but I think it really points to the investment potential and the payback we could get from further investment in supporting the sector. And I think some very practical areas where I think government could actually really make a difference. I think there's Q&A. I didn't have any more to add, but I'm happy to pause